Hello, everyone. Welcome to the NFL live show. We do this every Sunday, hop on around noon, talk about all of the notable injuries and how that news is going to affect the slate upcoming, projection changes, all that sort of stuff as well. We are broadcasting live on YouTube, so thanks for everyone joining via that. And there should be a chat option there. And if you guys want to ask any questions about guys on the slate, injuries, anything like that, we are happy to get to those at the end of the show. But first, we're going to start off with injuries. As you can see here, I am joined by Friedman and Ian, fellow Labs guys, and we're going to hop right into it. All right, let me share my screen and we'll get to it. Cool. All right, let's start with John Brown. He is going to be playing, Ian, but he is going to be limited. What are your thoughts on sort of how his limitation is going to affect the Arizona Cardinals defense in a pretty good spot here against the 49ers?
Yeah, it's an interesting setup here behind Larry Fitzgerald, who we know is locked into his usual role in the slot. But John Brown will return this week. He didn't play the last two, but that quad injury is still limiting him enough where Bruce Arians had to be pretty clear about saying he's not going to go out there and just play 70 snaps like it's nothing. So considering John Brown's dealing with that, J.J. Nelson has this lingering hamstring that forced him behind Jerome Brown and two wide receiver sets Monday night. So we're probably going to see somewhat of a committee in that second receiver spot between Nelson, John, and Jerome Brown.
Yeah, Freeman, you no bigger truther of J.J. Nelson than you. So, what are your thoughts on this rotation? It was definitely a little bit odd seeing J.J. play behind Jaron Brown, and now we have sort of I don't know. It's just tough to really figure out what the rotation is going to be with these wide receivers. Obviously, Fitz is in a really good spot here. Definitely got the number one wide receiver work. And against 49ers seems to be in a good spot again. But do you want any other Cardinals in this matchup?
No, it's really an unfortunate situation that J.J. Nelson has the hamstring issue. If he were healthy, I think he would be able to run laps around Jerron Brown, and John Brown would be able to play just kind of a supplemental role on limited snaps. But as it is now, John Brown, J.J. Nelson, Jerron Brown, not super interested in any of those guys. The thing with Fitz, if you look at the props, we're actually a little bit under on the props right now. But I think he's going to be pretty popular in terms of a DFS play, in terms of his ownership. I think the return of John Brown isn't going to do anything to diminish his ownership. John Brown's really just a supplementary guy at this point.
Yeah, 21 to 25% ownership for Fitz after the explosion last night, and with the he didn't get priced up because of the Monday night pricing situation. So definitely a guy that's going to be popular. I agree. All right, let's keep moving. Ian, what's going on with the Dallas Cowboys? They're playing the Rams, and Sean Lee apparently is questionable or likely out.
Sean Lee is out, so
out for sure.
That's been confirmed. And now they're going to be rolling with Jalen Smith, who has been receiving some pretty brutal Pro Football Focus scores in his first few games. Justin Durant wasn't signed to a team until the Cowboys picked him up in training camp. And now they're going to have to deal with, Todd Gurley, who is back to his ways of rushing over 100 yards. So we'll see how it goes with the Cowboys defense. Lee's been their leading tackler whenever he's on the field and kind of that guy that holds everything together for them. So it's a really big loss for them. They even have Keith Smith, who's like a fullback for them, waiting in line to play linebacker as well. So really not much depth over there.
Yeah, if a fullback has to go play linebacker, not a good sign. Freeman, what are your thoughts on Lee? Definitely, I think this is sort of the benefit of this show is a lot of people hit on the notable skill position injuries, but a guy like Lee definitely affects this game. What are your thoughts on Gurley going against a Lee-less Cowboys defense?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm a Cowboys fan, so I know all too well what that defense looks like when Sean Lee is not out there, and it is a substantial downgrade. Especially with Jalen Smith had to redshirt his first year in the league because of the knee issue. He's still not all the way back returning from that injury, and it's questionable as to whether he will ever be all the way back. So one thing that's going to be kind of like a theme of today, you have some really good road dog running backs who are great at catching passes out of the backfield. And so I think just in general in the prop market, what you see today is a good amount of value on those guys on the receiving props, and then some value going under on the rushing yardage for those guys. So I think that's the situation we see with Gurley right now. He's at 4 receptions, even money at 4, and then 32.5 yards. We significantly have him over on both of those. But in terms of yardage for rushing, 69.5 yards, we're leaning a little on the under there.
Okay. Keep on getting your questions in on YouTube. We'll get to those. We'll spend 5 minutes or so at the end of the show on that. Got some questions on the Oakland guys. We'll definitely get to them in just a second. But first, let's go to Detroit and Kenny Galladay. What's going on with him, and sort of how do you think that affects some of the guys that we're really, really interested in, like Golden Tate, Ian?
Yeah, so Kenny's out with a hamstring injury. He was ended up getting downgraded to a DMP midweek and won't be going. Big news is whether or not this means Golden Tate will be outside more often. We've all seen Xavier Rhodes lock up Mike Evans and Antonio Brown in back-to-back weeks, and I think the thought is that Rhodes will be on Marvin Jones, since Jones is typically their primary outside receiver. But TJ Jones got beaten out by Kenny Galladay pretty quickly in preseason. Not sure how much they really trust him. So if we end up seeing more 2 tight end sets or anything like that from the Lions, we could get a little bit more Golden Tate on Xavier Rhodes than we might have otherwise thought.
Yeah, what does that do for Tate's value, Friedman? A guy who was going to be fairly popular, again, not too expensive at 6'3", and definitely an intriguing play this week. But if there's even a chance of him getting some more roads closed, hashtag, that sort of takes him, especially out of cash games, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think it actually changes that much in terms of what we will actually see on the field in terms of the production. So as Ian mentioned, the supposition is that Rhodes is probably going to be locked up with Marvin Jones for a chunk of the time. And even when Rhodes isn't in shadow coverage, he tends to play that side of the field a little bit more anyway. So it would be very possible that we could see Golden Tate move in and out of the slot, but not see still all that much action from Xavier Rhodes anyway. So we haven't really changed much with our projections. His prop market is 6 receptions, 67.5 yards. That is basically right where we have him. So I don't know how much really changes with this news, but I think people's perceptions will change more than what actually happens on the field.
Fair enough. Let's move to another game. This getting a lot of questions on this one. People definitely want to use some of these guys for better or for worse. Ian, what's going on with Michael Crabtree, and thoughts on Oakland going against Denver with or without him?
Yeah, so Crabtree was able to return to practice this week, but then got downgraded to doubtful yesterday. So it's looking like he's not going to be out there, which means we get to see Amari Cooper as the undisputed number 1. Unfortunately, it has to come against this Denver defense. But as far as the rest of the snaps getting distributed, Jared Cook's kind of been their almost number 3 receiver so far this season. So you would think him and Seth Roberts would have bigger roles. And they actually have been using Cordarrelle Patterson a little more like a regular receiver in his time there. It's hard to really get behind any of these guys. I know Friedman's been loving Coop as a contrarian play this week, and Crabtree being out certainly helps that. But we'll see where Carr goes with it.
Yeah, so Freeman, let's talk through, I guess, the main 2 guys that we're looking at, Cooper and Cook. I guess the question is, if Crabtree's out, we'd expect them to get more targets. Is that a good thing, or is just the very tough matchup sort of outweigh the extra targets? And for both Cooper and then also for Cook as well, Denver has been susceptible to especially tight ends in the middle of the field, but is Crabtree being out can they just load up in the middle of the field more than they would have with 2 guys on the outside?
It's interesting. So Denver, they don't use shadow coverage at all. They just play their guys on their side of the field. So I think this is actually a negative in terms of DFS for Cooper. I think this is going to increase his popularity just a little bit, because people will think, okay, now I can go with Cooper. He's going to get a lot of targets that would have gone to Crabtree. And what was great about Cooper in this matchup was that he was going to have sub 1% ownership. And it's questionable as to what we will see now with his ownership. It's not going to be super high, but I think what we're going to see with Cooper is that he's going to line up a lot against Bradley Roby. They're not going to run him against Aqib Talib or Chris Harris Jr. in the slot. He's going to go against Roby. He's going to get shots. I still like him in this spot. Jack Del Rio came out in defense of Cooper this week saying he's still a stud. Just watch him do his thing. So, I think they want to get him the ball to get him going early. I think that's the only way they have a chance of winning this game is if Cooper can kind of outperform going against that weakest guy in the secondary. I do like Cook. Last year they were strong. They being the secondary for the Broncos. Last year they were strong. This year, they don't have TJ Ward. They're a strong safety to cover the tight ends, and so they have been exposed. So I do like Cook, especially with extra volume going his direction. I don't dislike either one of those guys as the person you run back with on a Denver stack.
Yeah, that's an interesting call there as well. All right, let's keep on moving. We have two more to hit on. This one can be brief here. Carlos Hyde, likely to play, but definitely could be potentially limited. Ian, is that sort of what you're hearing?
Yeah, they came out Monday and said that he'd be limited in practice all week. So the good news is this wasn't something that really flared up on Wednesday or anything like that. But although it's looking like he'll play for sure, it's kind of got down to more of a game time decision than I think a lot of people thought. But still, I mean, we've seen Hyde dominate that backfield all season long. There's really no one that's going to come in there and take much of his carries. So maybe a slight downgrade, because he is this close to a game time decision, but not too much reason for concern overall.
Okay. Anything to add from?
Yeah. Road dog, go under on the rushing yards. And I would say feel free to go over on the receiving and the receptions if you feel confident enough in him playing. If not, you can go, I think, under on everything.
Sure. All right. And last one we're going to hit on before we get to a couple questions here. Seattle Seahawks. We have Baldwin, who is expecting to play, but I guess sort of the same situation with Hyde. Will it limit him? And sort of how do you think that's going to affect matchups and just the general production of this offense? Tyler Lockett getting a little more buzz. This game is not on the DraftKings main slate, but definitely this is an interesting game for the primetime slates and then on FanDuel where you can get this game in. Ian, what are your thoughts on Seattle offense with this Baldwin news?
So Baldwin's definitely more of a game time decision than Hyde. I think the exact quote from this morning was that he's going to try to give it a go in warm up. So we'll see there. I think I saw the 50% of the Seahawks questionable players have ended up not playing over the past few years, which is a league high. So always got to be ready for that game time call with them. But otherwise, it's looking like a great matchup for Lockett and P. Rich, especially if Baldwin's not out and they need to kind of funnel production to those two. We're seeing Vontae Davis come back from the Colts. He missed the first 3 weeks with a groin injury. But we saw he wasn't the same number one lockdown corner that some of us might remember last season, and it's tough to tell how close he'll be to full go anyway. So he lines up on that side over P. Rich, more so Tyler Lockett. And with Tyler Lockett playing a season high 90% of snaps last week, he's looking like the natural pivot off of Baldwin.
Freeman, any thoughts on this offense?
Yeah, love Lockett. He's not going to be matched up against Davis all that much. He can move in and out of the slot. The Colts secondary is very weak, vulnerable, deep. Lockett has the speed to be able to get deep and exploit them. I think it's a pretty decent spot for him. I think, especially in the primetime slate, he will be pretty popular.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think he probably should be somewhat popular, but maybe the casual player won't quite know that his role is going to increase. So maybe an interesting play in those for sure. All right, let's get to a couple questions. Freeman, I'll kick to you since you had written about this quite a bit. Julio, and we're just sort of talking about the higher priced wide receivers. What are your thoughts on Julio as a large home favorite? And he just really hasn't been the same sort of guy. We haven't had the Mount St. Julio eruption, hasn't really had the touchdowns. Is that something that you think is going to just continue, that they're just going to be more run heavy? Or do you think that Julio is in an eruption spot this week?
So there are some sharp people who really like Julio. So in general, I tend to defer to them. But I have to say, historically, Ever since the Falcons kind of transitioned into a team that could win games with the running game, when they are home favorites, they are not giving Julio the ball. And we've seen his target total decrease significantly since 2015. It was around, I think, 12.7 targets per game, and now it's around 8.7, that's just massive drop off. But as a home favorite since last season, Julio has had 88.7 yards per game. That's well off of what he normally averages. So I understand why people are enthusiastic. It seems like a smash spot, but I'm not as sold.
Fair enough. All right, let's move to some other questions here. Ian, this will be yours. Any concern about Zeke with just the Dallas Cowboys being a little more pass heavy of late this year? I mean, we definitely need to probably talk about the matchups that they've been in and whether that's been representative of their offense this year. But Elliott's in a smash spot against the Rams here after being in some tough matchups. But I guess some people in our chat are a little concerned about usage just because Des Bryant has been pretty heavily targeted this year.
Yeah, I think the Cowboys, to their core, still want to run the ball right down your throat. I think people have been talking about Zeke kind of looks like he's not as quick as last year. He hasn't really had any of these gashing runs that we kind of grew used to. But I think it's worth mentioning that these first three defenses he saw, Giants, Broncos, and Cardinals, yes, they all have great secondaries, but those are also the top three defenses and fewest open field yards allowed per carry last year. They tackle very well at all three levels and are just overall very solid defenses. So now with the Cowboys back at home for the first time, like a significant favorite, I'm expecting them to really lean on Zeke as much as possible. And, the presence of Aaron Donald doesn't help, but with Connor Barwin and Robert Quinn, those are two pass rushers versus run heavy guys. So we'll see what they choose to do.
Just one point to add on to that. In the Cowboys' 2 victories this year, Zeke has 24 and 22 rushes. So they still want to run the ball.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. All right, let's see here. Let's go to some other questions. So this is some people talking about this this Houston game here. So let's go to that and talk just a little bit about this. And I think a fairly good question is it's some people are worried, and maybe rightly so, that there's so many cash game plays in this game with Deshaun as sort of a cash game guy. At quarterback, DeAndre with his price and target share, and then even running it back with Rashard Matthews on the other side. But the spread the game total is only 43. So I guess the question, I'll kick it to either one of you if you have any thoughts. I can give mine after. Are you worried when it comes to cash game guys? Do you look at the total and you're like, I can't use a quarterback that's only implied for 20 points? Or are you just more looking towards projected plus minus, projected floor, stuff like that? Freeman, if you want to start.
Yeah, so a couple of considerations. So one, projected plus minus, that stuff matters, but then also and floor matters. But what also matters is your roster construction viability. So it's possible that in any given week, a guy might look like a decent cash game play, but he just doesn't fit in with a roster that makes sense for cash games. And so I think that's the bigger thing. If you're looking at punting at quarterback, going with someone cheaper in that Tyrod Taylor type of range, Deshaun Watson, I think he's an option there. And DeAndre Hopkins is obviously obviously an option, but it's just a question of whether they fit your salary construction. But in terms of just their viability on their own, they're cheap enough where I think it makes sense. And Rashard Matthews, he's been like a top guy in our models since the first week of the season. He's just still priced down a lot on DraftKings.
Right. Yeah, I think people get a little too tied up in Vegas totals. I mean, those are definitely very important. In general, Vegas stuff definitely gets their lines right. So you want to focus on the guys in the high implied totals games, but those guys are also more expensive, and there's a salary cap, so you have to take that into factor. And Deshaun's 5'1". Ian, anything to add on this?
Yeah, like you said, want to pay attention to Vegas totals, but also we got to know what personnel changes are going on that make guys more valuable. Rashard Matthews is so high in our models right now because Corey Davis is out, their number 1 pick. So Rashard is basically by that fact still Mariota's number 1 guy. On the other side of the ball, let's not forget Will Fuller is back. First game of the season. That dude's got 4.3 speed, had over 80 yards in 3 of the first 4 games last year. I mean, Braxton Miller was a healthy scratch. So, yeah, I mean, it looks like they're ready to go at Will Fuller.
Yeah, definitely an important thing. It could take a little attention away from DeAndre. So maybe a net positive for him as well. All right, last one we're going to get to. We're going to head back to this Seattle game. Definitely an interesting one, which is sort of a shame that we don't get to have it on the main slate, but we have that prime time slate where we can really load up on some of these guys. Kick to you, then Matt, you can finish off adding some thoughts, and then we'll get out of here. Thoughts on Chris Carson in the Seattle run game? Chris Carson has been trending upwards, but what are your thoughts? I mean, if people are going to be so high on Lockett and Russell Wilson, Chris Carson, what are your thoughts on just his role, and could he be an interesting pivot to some of these guys in tournaments?
Yeah, I was actually a little worried about this matchup to start the week. Colts have been sneakily pretty good on rush defense and kind of funneling things towards the pass. And we've all seen the disaster that is the Seahawks offensive line. But I mean, when you're a double-digit home favorite, and Carson has been the guy in that backfield for the last few weeks, even with everyone else fully healthy, it's hard to pick apart the matchup too much. And it is worth mentioning, I think, yes, Carson was a 7th round draft pick and didn't have much prestige, but he's 3rd in Pro Football Focus's elusive rating right now. I mean, he's making dudes miss. He looks really good out there. So, with him having that ability to also make plays on his own, maybe the Seahawks, that offensive line isn't as big of a factor as it might otherwise be.
Yeah, Freeman. So you profiled him, I think 2 weeks ago when he was first starting to trend upwards on our Flex podcast. What are your thoughts on him? Obviously, going against the Colts could be a potential coming out party.
Yeah, I mean, it's as Ian said, they haven't really allowed a running back to go off, but keep in mind in week 2 they played a David Johnson-less Cardinals team that was figuring out what they were doing at the position. Last week, they were playing the Browns, who are sort of like in Armageddon mode. They have no idea what they're doing. So I don't know if we've really seen them in a representative spot. So, yeah, it is a decent spot for him. As Ian said, big home favorites. A running back really doesn't even have to be that good to tear it up in that situation. Right. So, I'm especially fine with him, given that he could be great leverage on other players.
I feel like that was a dig at Melvin Gordon, even though you didn't say his name. You're always looking for a dig at Melvin.
No, there was no Melvin Gordon.
And Jason Anthill said Carson, Seattle defense stack. I mean, that's not going against the Colts at home. That's probably not a bad correlation play there.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, we're going to end it there. Thank you guys for joining us for the show. We're going to be back every week at noon going over injuries, projection changes, and your questions. So good luck. Hope to see Fantasy Labs guys at the top of the leaderboards, and we'll talk to you guys next week.